All right. So welcome everyone. My name is Stephanie Small, Medical Director at Jewish Family and Community Services at JFCS. And I want to welcome you to our second webinar about suicide prevention and teens and young adults. This is how to listen, assess, and guide teens in a crisis. I want to present our presenters will be Erin Barr, our clinical coordinator, and Shelby Williams, our therapist. And they're going to talk about exactly that, how to assess and listen and guide teens in crisis. We will be having future webinars as well, continuing this topic to try to get everyone as comfortable as possible with being suicidality aware and making sure everybody has the tools that they need in case something would happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Erin and to Shelby.
Thanks, Steph. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with you this evening or this afternoon, I suppose, depending on where you're joining from. And we really don't know where you are, but you could be anywhere. So just to start with a couple of housekeeping things. We do not have a PowerPoint prepared, so there will be no slide presentation. We did this intentionally because I feel like this is sort of a heavy topic to be discussing, and as much as possible, we wanted to make it conversational. So if you are comfortable, we invite you to turn on your cameras if you're in a place that allows for that, and you feel comfortable doing so. It makes it a little bit more personal for all of us. It's totally understandable if you're not in a place or a state of mind to be personal right now, or you just had enough Zoom for the day. Like Steph said, we will have time for questions at the end. As a reminder, though, it is recording, so if you speak your question, your face will show up, and we will be posting this to social media and our website. It will be shared with a larger audience, just so you are aware of that. Some of you did leave questions or left things that you wanted to make sure we discussed when you registered, and as much as possible, we tried to cover those things in our prepared notes for this evening. If we didn't answer it well enough, or if we didn't answer it at all, please bring that up at the end. We want to make sure that people feel like their needs are being met. So in lieu of a PowerPoint presentation, we do have a list of resources that we will be sharing via email afterwards. It's a nice PDF. It's a clickable link, so you can keep it. You can open it on your phone. You can open it on your computer and just click all of the resources, so you don't have to even type anything in there. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to Shelby.
All right, everyone. It's very nice to be here with you all today and to see some of your faces or photos. So what we're going to start off with today is a grounding technique or a self-regulation tool. We're doing this for a few reasons. One, we want to recognize that this is a difficult topic, and we want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves through this training. The tool that we're going to use is called a safe space visualization. So if at any point this topic becomes too heavy, you are always welcome to excuse yourself and take a break, or you can return to your safe space that we sort of describe through this meditation. And two, these grounding techniques are extremely helpful tools to keep in our coping skills box. They're really beneficial to have available to you when you find yourself in a stressful situation. So ideally, these are tools that we would practice on a consistent basis. So when we really need them, they're available to us and they feel like second nature. So if you would allow yourself to find a comfortable position, since we're at home, this might be a lot easier than if we were meeting in person. If you have a pillow nearby, you can place it behind your back, or whatever will make you feel cozy. If you feel uncomfortable or distressed at any time, feel free to open your eyes and ground yourself in today, in your room, wherever you are, and remind yourself that you are safe and you are in control today. So I want to invite you to begin by deepening your breath. If it feels comfortable for you, you can close your eyes, or you can find a spot to gaze at if you prefer to keep them open. Breathe in safety and peace. Breathe out fear. Check in with yourself and see where you're holding tension. Continue breathing as you check in with yourself. With each breath out, release that tension. Allow your breathing to gradually slow down. Notice how gentle and quiet your breathing is becoming. Let peace and serenity surround you. As you do this, allow yourself to picture in your mind's eye a safe place. In this place of safety, only you are allowed. In this place of safety, no one can come without your invitation. In this place of safety, you are always at peace. Allow the images to come. What type of place does your mind choose as a safe space? For some, you may be at the beach. For others, you may be in the mountains, or in an old cabin, or a beautiful garden. Perhaps it's not a place you've ever seen before, except in the beauty of your own mind. Allow yourself to see what is here in your safe space. Imagine the details of your surroundings. Notice the trees. Notice the beautiful colors. What season is it? What color is the sky? Notice the ground beneath you. Is it earthy soil, rock, or sand? Maybe it's soft grass. Are you seated on the ground or in a comfortable chair? Are you barefooted? What do you feel beneath your feet? What smells do you notice? Is it sweet or is it refreshing? Are there birds overhead? Can you hear them singing? Listen closely. What other sounds do you hear? Let these sounds lull you peacefully. Notice if there's any water. Is there a pond or a waterfall or waves? Can you hear the sound of the water? If you'd like, let the water flow over your skin. Notice how it feels. Is it warm or is it cool? Notice if there is a breeze or wind. What does it feel like on your skin? Maybe the sun is shining down on you and gently warms you. Maybe it's a cool, crisp fall and the wind softly brushes your face. Allow yourself to take in all these senses, feeling calm, peaceful, and serene. Breathe in and out. Allow yourself to come alive in this place. Feel your body resting on the ground, allowing any tension to be released into the earth, letting it slip away. Imagine the earth cradling you, allowing you to relax even more and feel safe during this time. Continue to breathe. Notice as you become part of your safe space that you feel more rested, more relaxed, and more at peace. Remember that this place is always yours, always safe. After you have thoroughly visualized this place and you are ready to leave, gently and slowly allow yourself to come back into the room. Maybe wiggle a few toes or fingers, gradually bringing your attention back to the room you're in. As you leave your safe space for now, remember that you can return at any time you'd like. When you're ready, if you have your eyes closed, feel free to open them, but continue to stay in a relaxed position, taking a moment to reawaken completely. Take a few moments to experience, reflect, and enjoy your guided meditation. Your safe space is available to you whenever you need to go there. Does anyone have any feedback or thoughts on how that went or how that felt? Different grounding techniques, work better for some people and others work better for others. So I was curious if anybody had any feedback on that. All right. So now that we're all settled and relaxed, thank you. One of the questions we received from we're going to jump right in. Now that we're feeling grounded, we're going to start with how to talk to teenagers and young adults. So one of the questions we received from the registration was, what is the first step? So if someone brings up having thoughts about suicide to you, the first step is to simply be there with them, to listen to them, to validate what they're feeling, and to just be a support in that moment. When a person is thinking about suicide, they often feel they have no other option and feel like they're completely alone. So if you're simply present with them and hear what they have to say, that is a huge first step in and of itself. It shows them that they aren't completely alone and that you care about their well-being. Now, if the young person in your life has not brought up suicide to you directly, then the first step may be for you to bring it up and ask them the question yourself. Teenagers aren't always the most forthcoming people. So sometimes you may have to be the person to ask those tough questions. Which brings me on to my next point. It is okay to say the word suicide. There's a myth surrounding that if you bring up suicide, that you're going to put that idea into someone's head. And that we have found is not true. In fact, I've been taught that using specific and direct words and phrases like suicide or thoughts of killing yourself is important and encouraged. Using those words and being upfront and direct promotes honesty between you and the person that you're speaking with, and it can reduce feelings of stigma and shame. You saying suicide isn't going to push them towards it or make them feel worse. They likely have thought about it before. So you're giving them a space to talk about it, and without any judgment, that's a lot of times a huge relief for people. However, that's a relief for the person who is having thoughts of suicide. That does not necessarily mean it's a relief for you. And I want to acknowledge how difficult being in those situations with someone you care about can be, especially when you have to, ask those really direct questions. But I want to encourage you to remember that we have a better chance of interrupting suicidal ideation or plans when the teen or young person shares how they're feeling with us, rather than when they don't share anything at all. We can't help if we don't know what's going on, right? So as uncomfortable as it is to ask those questions, especially if the person in your life isn't being forthcoming, it could really make a huge difference in interrupting whatever thoughts and feelings they're having. So unfortunately, it may be up to you to ask those hard questions, but in the long run, it could really, really benefit and help someone who's having a difficult moment. Additionally, it's okay to not have all the answers, right? It's okay to not know exactly what to say or immediately jump into problem solving mode and think that you have to know exactly what to do, what's step 1, step 2, step 3. We want you to know that that's not the case. You don't have to know everything. There are many, many resources and highly trained professionals who know exactly what questions to ask and know exactly when to get additional help involved, such as in Allegheny County, we have Resolve, the mobile crisis team. So you do not have to be the person who makes the decision if you need to get additional help involved with somebody. There's also, the crisis text line, the National Suicide Prevention Line, and there are even crisis lines specific for LGBTQ youth. So, you do not have to be the end all be all for these situations. And therapists and mental health professionals, even we use these resources. We may have been trained to ask the correct questions, but we still are not the end decision maker in somebody going through a crisis. It's really common for us to call Resolve or call, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, whatever it is, we use these resources as well. So I hope that helps relieve some of the pressure of feeling like you have to know exactly what to do in every situation. Additionally, if you find yourself feeling overwhelmed and feeling like you don't know what to do next, or you don't know the right questions to ask, just be upfront with the person you're speaking with. Let them know that you're there to support them, acknowledge what they're feeling, but it's okay to tell them that you're not the expert. This isn't your area of expertise, and that you'd like to bring in another professional into the conversation. Again, this too encourages honesty and transparency. You can even call these resources with the teen there with you, which I think is important, and I would encourage you to do, because you want to stay with that person when they're in their moment of distress. Staying with the young person in your life is a protective factor all in itself. One, you're showing that you're there for them, you're supportive and you're caring. And two, you don't want them to leave where they are and say, oh yeah, I'll call when I get home. And then you don't know what happens from there. So you can call these crisis centers with the teen there with you. And it encourages open conversation, doesn't make the teen feel like their situation is taboo or has to be a conversation that is held in private. It's just being transparent with them. Again, I'll say it 100 times, validate what they're feeling, provide non-judgmental support. Even if you don't know what to say, just being present with that person and telling them I'm here for you is enough. Nobody has the 100% correct answers or words to share in these situations. And really, I don't know if there are 100% correct words or answers to share in these situations, but just validating them and hearing them for where they are. And finally, I think it's important to touch on toxic positivity. So I think, as caring people, helping professionals, parents, friends, whatever we are in this webinar, we find ourselves in situations where if someone we really care about is feeling down or is feeling distressed, we often want to jump right into, how can I fix this? What do you have, to look forward to? Jumping right into those sort of protective factors and, trying to remind the team that there are other options beyond suicide. This is wonderful and great. However, especially with teens and younger people, if we don't acknowledge how big their feelings are right in that moment and how much they're struggling first, they may end up, rolling their eyes at us, or they may become frustrated. If someone's in an active crisis and you jump right into, oh, but think of your future, think of your friends, without first acknowledging how scared they must be feeling right then, they could feel like they're not being heard. And, that's definitely an uncomfortable thing, right? To acknowledge the bad before you, jump to the good and make those connections and provide the distractions and remind them that there are other options. It feels uncomfortable. But a lot of times that is the first step in validating what they're going through. You know, I think sometimes phrases like good vibes only are meant with, I think they mean well, but they're not always helpful. You know, sometimes the vibes are bad, and that's okay. So I'm going to pass it back to Erin for a few minutes.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about a couple of general things to keep in mind when and if you're having these difficult conversations with teens. And as I'm bringing this up, I realized that we forgot to do our Zoom poll at the beginning. And one of the questions that we had programmed into the Zoom poll, which we're not going to do now, was how many of you have had to have these conversations? So if you are comfortable like showing a hand or like typing into the chat, I'm just curious if people have had to have these conversations and you're sort of like, oh, I wish I had a better idea of what I should do or how I could have handled it, or if you're here just sort of as a preventative measure in case you need to. So I think, to me, if I had to break it down into the very simplest things to keep in mind when you're having these conversations, it's sort of like two things you're working towards: connection and distraction. So it's important to help the young person feel like they have connections in the world, and they might not be able to recognize them at that moment because they're in a bit of a crisis. So pointing out to them people that are important, significant relationships that they have. Do they have responsibility to other people? Like, are they on a team? Do they have a youth group or some sort of social organization that they're involved with? Even pets sometimes, like if you own a pet, people tend to love their pets. Like, what would your pet do without you? Trying to get them to feel connected to someone or something in the world can be very helpful in sort of, you know, taking their mind off of the thought or reminding them about the importance of them, how important they are to other people. Thinking, and then in terms of distraction, I mean, it's not meant to be like, you know, making funny faces at like a little child to get them to stop crying. But the idea is to like move their mind away from their thoughts of suicide. So it could be reminding them of healthy habits that they have. Maybe if they're an athlete or they like to exercise or they do yoga, maybe they find release in drawing or making art. Any healthy coping skills that you know about, you can remind them about those things and possibly suggest that they try them. One of the things that happens when teens or anybody is identified as being at risk for suicide, often a safety plan is created, and these coping skills are part of the safety plan. It's like, because in that moment, they're not able to think about why, or think about the things that they could be doing or things that make them feel better because they're so singularly focused on their feelings in that moment. So sort of bringing those up again, I think can be helpful. And again, like Shelby said, just being there with them, that makes a huge difference, right? I always tell people, like, somebody brings this conversation to you or talks to you about having thoughts of suicide or really not wanting to be alive anymore. Like, that's not the time to be like, oh, sorry, you know what, I had dinner plans, I got to get going. You clear your calendar, anything else that you had going on in that day, that evening, as much as possible, cancel it, and make yourself available to that youth. And even that, showing them that they matter enough to you that you will stay there with them into the night, after work hours. I think that sends the message that they are in fact important. I think sometimes it can help also when you're having these conversations, if you're able to sit next to them as opposed to like across the desk from them. I don't know how many people on this call are professionals, where you're typically used to sitting on the other side of a desk or, you know, sitting like face to face with a client that you're working with. But in these moments, it can kind of take some of the pressure off to be sitting next to. And then it sort of symbolizes like, we're in this together. We are side by side taking on this difficult moment. If it's appropriate within the context of your relationship to that person, even some like slight physical contact, like on the side of your body. I mean, you don't have to like put your arms around them or like put your hand on their leg if that feels awkward, but like allowing just that contact with them, just again, connection, physical sensation can be helpful and calming for a lot of people. So encouraging that and sort of creating that situation can be helpful. And taking a step back a little bit, I guess, in, you know, almost like a prevention method or something you can do to prepare so that a teen feels comfortable coming to you with these types of thoughts, I think is to normalize mental health and normalize talking about feelings with them. If you're a parent or you're here on behalf of your own family members, you have a lot more control over that. But if you are a professional, if you're working in a school, or you do youth group, or you do some sort of social programming with teenagers, talk about feelings, do check-ins, like just sort of creating the culture that you care about how they're feeling, you care about what's going on with them, and that this is a place where we talk about that, so that it's not you go all of a sudden from only talking about soccer and winning and approaches to the game, but we talk about feelings too, so that they don't have to feel so uncomfortable coming, or they can be reassured that you are a person that they can talk to about these bigger, scarier feelings. Because it's also important to keep in mind that they're scary feelings for that young person. Most people aren't enjoying their thoughts of suicide, right? It's not something that brings them pleasure. It's really scary, scary feelings that they're having. And it's scarier when there's no outlet for that. So as scary, again, as Shelby said, as scary as it is for you to be the receiver of those thoughts and their plans and what's going on inside of their head, it's scarier for them to have nowhere to put those things. So ways you can sort of talk about some of this stuff, if you're worried about your kid, or you're worried about a teenager in your school or somebody you're working with, I think it's always helpful to notice things. Like, I've noticed that you don't talk to so-and-so as much as you used to. Or I noticed that, you used to stay after school for this activity or this programming, and you haven't been doing that. Or I know it's hard because teenagers like to spend time in the room anyway. If they're still virtual school, they're spending a lot of time in their room. But like noticing that and bringing that up. And I wonder if that's something you want to talk about, or I wonder if that's something it would be helpful for you to talk about with our family doctor or with a professional. Like, you can just wonder about things. The power of curiosity, I think it's not very direct, and it's just sort of opening the door. I also think when I was in graduate school, a professor said, especially working with teenagers, we're seed planters. You put ideas out there, you're planting seeds along the way, dropping bits of information, dropping some knowledge that you want them to have, and you hope that one day it grows into a flower. You're just opening that door a crack so that they are able to open it fully themselves when they're ready. You don't often see the fruits of your labor immediately, but you're just hoping that those thoughts that you're putting out there, that brochure that you picked up, or that resource email that you got from UpStreet after this webinar, and you just leave it out on your table, you leave it somewhere where they can see, you're just opening the door, leaving opportunity, and creating the culture that it's okay for them to talk to you about this. If you're working at a school, you can put these things on your desk, you post things on the board, or on bulletin boards in the hallway. It's just sort of like putting it out there in case they're ready. I also think it's okay, also on that note, like if they don't want to talk about it, or they don't have any thoughts, or they don't respond to you, or they roll your eyes at you and like walk away, that's okay. That's to be expected. Keep bringing it up every once in a while. Don't hound them with it, because then you just become annoying and they're less likely to talk to you. But just putting it out there and sort of dancing around that line of like, I'm just going to mention this every once in a while. Even something like this, like, hey, I went to this training the other day, and it was talking all about teen mental health. Like, I wonder, like, do you notice that in your friends? How are your friends doing? And, it's like calling for a friend, asking for a friend. Don't make it so they're talking about themselves. They're talking about somebody else, which might actually be themselves, right? But at least if they're talking about it, you can get a sense of what's going on. It can be a little clue into their world sometimes. I also think the timing of the conversation is important. If they're like in the middle of studying for finals, like college students are right now, probably not a great time to bring it up, right? Like, they have their mind on 100 other things. They don't feel like they have time to have this conversation. It always seems like driving in the car is a good time to talk, because like you're not doing anything else. There's no eye contact. You're sort of sitting next to each other, or they're sitting in the back. So you can just sort of pop these things up at that point. But again, be prepared for them to not engage, and that's all right. Sometimes they'll be quiet. Their silence is part of the process, I think, sometimes. So be comfortable with the silence.
Just to jump in there really quickly, I had a teacher in grad school who said that motion gets kids talking. So she too will bring up, topics like this when she's in the car with her kids, because you're right, they don't have anywhere to go. They're not really looking at you. And then the motion of the car a lot of times gets them flowing, when if they were, stagnant, seated in a chair at home, they may not share. So that's a good suggestion.
And they're kind of a captive audience. They can't really get up and walk out of the room either. I mean, not that you're trying to trap them in the conversation, but like they really have nowhere to go. All right. So I also wanted to talk about what to expect or what might happen if you call a crisis line or if you call the National Suicide Prevention Line, because if you haven't done that before, that I'm hopeful that this will like reduce some of your own anxiety around doing it, because you don't know what to expect. It's harder to remain that calming presence in the person's life. So the first time I ever had to call as a professional, I was slightly annoyed with how calm the person on the phone was, right? Because I'm like, this is a situation, like we have a crisis, like I need immediate assistance. And they're like, so tell me, what's the person's name? Which makes sense, right? They should be calm. They're mirroring for us what we're supposed to be doing. They're calm on purpose because they're trying to get information out of you. They're trying to keep you calm. If they were equally as panicked, nobody would get anywhere. So they will be calm, and that's a good thing. They're going to ask a lot of basic questions, information, what your name is, what the youth's name is, specifically things they have said to you, contact information, a phone number, an address, and they get all of that stuff up front in case you get disconnected, in case you hang up, in case something happens. They sort of know where you are and they can respond appropriately. They will ask questions like details. They want to know, does the person have a plan? Do they have access to means? And when we talk about access to means, we're talking about things that could assist in a successful suicide. Do they have access to weapons? Are there prescription medications in the house? In Pittsburgh, we have to keep in mind that we have bridges. And for a lot of people, we don't have to travel very far to find a bridge, right? And again, that's kind of uncomfortable to think about, but it is also very true. There was recently, even in my own school district, a young person died by suicide by jumping off a bridge. So it does happen, and it's something to be aware of. You might want to, so on the note of means, right? You want to lock up firearms, lock them up, put the ammunition somewhere else. If they are in a safe that has a key, hide the key, keep the key on you. Depending on what goes on in your household, your teenager might have access to that. Or it might, sometimes people like leave the key on top of the safe too. So you want to remove it. Think about weapons in the kitchen. Do you have, not weapons, sharp knives, sharp objects, things that people can cut themselves with? Maybe this is the time to get rid of medication that you don't need anymore, like that prescription for a painkiller that you got after they had their wisdom teeth removed and you never used it. Now's the time to just get rid of it, right? Anything that can reduce their access is going to be helpful and can be a life-saving decision that you make, right? People will even say, take car keys away. Again, you don't want them to feel like you're keeping them hostage in their house, but if they have access to a car, that provides them means. Cars can be deadly. Again, bridges, getting them to places where they're able to actually follow through with a plan. So the crisis line is going to ask questions like that. And again, it's something that you can talk to the person about. Ideally, the young person would talk to them and be able to share that information with them themselves, but they don't always want to, and that's okay too. I also feel it's important to put out there, again, I don't know where everyone is located. In Allegheny County, we do have Resolve Crisis Network, and they do have a mobile crisis team, but the mobile crisis team is not always available. So when you call crisis, sometimes it is the police that are dispatched. If you need somebody to come out, it can be the police. And I feel like I just need to let people know that, because the difference between a mobile crisis team and a group of social workers walking into a situation feels different than a police officer walking into a situation, right? Mobile crisis team don't have weapons or guns or handcuffs. Police officers do. And not that they always use them, but that, people have feelings about police officers, and they're not always, they're not a mobile crisis team. They're police officers and they're trained for a very specific function. It's not always mental health intervention, but due to lack of resources and availability, sometimes that's what happens, or that's who is sent. So just so you know that going into it, so that you're not surprised either. Okay, I think that's what I had to talk about. So Shelby, I think you're up next, unless you wanted me to talk about the hand brain first before you get into the next part of it.
No, I'm good to go. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how should you as the caregiver, the parent, the professional prepare emotionally for these conversations? So, a big part of that is educating yourself, right? Taking trainings like this. A lot of times having some information in your back pocket can help bring your anxiety levels down. B, working on those grounding techniques, having breathing exercises or, self-regulation tools already in your workbook, in your toolbox is really important, because when you're in one of these stressful situations with someone, your rational brain really isn't there, right? So you're not going to think like, oh, I should go back and think about my safe space. If you have those sort of regulation tools already consistently in your toolbox, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to bring your nervous system down. And then in turn, the person you're working with, that will help them match the sort of energy that you're at. If you are able to de-escalate, then they will likely match. I like to think of it as like modeling healthy behaviors, except you're modeling a relaxed stress response. And kind of what goes hand in hand with that too is self-care. We can't take care of others if we're not taking care of ourselves. And I think it's important to remember that self-care is more than just, taking a bubble bath or doing a spa day every once in a while. It's about having a variety of tools and coping skills in all different life domains, consistently worked into your schedule and your life so that they're there for you when you really need them. You want to do these things when you're thriving, so that when you're having a hard time, they're like second nature. And sometimes, your go-to coping skill might not work for you that day. So it's helpful to have a variety of different tools that you use. One day you might want to focus on something spiritual, do some meditation, lean on your religion. Another day you might want to focus on your biological life domain and, eat a really nutritious meal and go for a run. Just because one thing works for you one day doesn't mean it will work for you every single time you need it. And then two, tying that back into the grounding techniques we've talked about, similar to the idea of practicing self-care all the time, practicing those breathing techniques or, self-regulation tools all the time makes it a lot easier for you to use them when you really need them. So another de-escalation technique that I have found to be really helpful is a body scan. It's really simple. You can do it really quickly, or you can make it longer. But basically, you just turn your attention towards your body and notice how it's feeling. See if you're holding tension anywhere and release that tension, relax your muscles. So you can start at your toes and move up. You can start at your head and move down, however you want to do it. It's up to you. But that's a tool that you can use in any situation, right? You can't always, go take a bubble bath when you're feeling stressed out. So it's important to have these tools that you can use when you're in a training like this, or you are in a meeting at work, or you're at school, whatever it is. It's important to have tactics that you can use when you don't have the ability to leave your situation. So if you have heard of a body scan before, or if you haven't, YouTube's a really good place to start. They have a ton of guided meditations, or they'll even walk you through the body scan. And the more you do those things, the easier it is for you to do them while you're in the middle of a situation or you're focusing on something else. So, for me, when I first started to do the body scan, I had to really pay attention and I had to really only focus on what I was doing right then. But now that I've practiced it more and more, I could do the body scan now while I'm in this training with you all. And two, we linked some videos with our resources, so you can check them out yourself if you would like to, see if they would be helpful for you. Might take some trial and error to figure out what you like the best, but I definitely encourage you to start on YouTube and have someone walk you through it themselves.
I just want to jump in really quickly. For those of you that aren't familiar with what grounding techniques are or what we're talking about or what that means, the idea of grounding, and it's not like you ground your kids when they have misbehaved or they, cut class or snuck out at night. Grounding is a way, I mean, in its simplest terms, it gets you out of your head. It stops your thoughts from racing and worrying about like what's going to happen later, what's going to happen tomorrow, what already happened yesterday. It brings you into the moment. And it's often things that involve your senses. So the body scan is you turning your attention inward and paying attention to where you're holding tension in your body. Another one I like to do, and I use myself and I teach to people all the time, it's called sensory sensitization, but really what it is holding an object in your hand and paying attention to that object. How does it feel? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Is it bumpy? Is it cold? Noticing how it feels, because when you're paying attention to that, you're not thinking about all of the things that you could be worried about or things that you should have done or could have said. So we do have a bunch of videos linked in that resource page that we're going to send out afterwards and encourage you to try them. Again, like Shelby said, I can't reiterate enough how important it is to practice these things when you don't need them. Most of us would probably not show up to the New York City Marathon without having trained for it. You don't just show up at a thing and think that you can do it because you like ran a mile the other day, right? When you're activated and stressed out. So just a very quick demonstration of what happens in your brain when we're feeling stressed out. This is our hand brain. So here where my thumb is the amygdala, which is like the fear center of the brain. So this is like the alarm system that goes off, like danger, something to be worried about. I should be scared. This is like our instinctual brain, our reptile brain, sometimes it's called. And my fingers like cupped over my brain, because the amygdala is inside your brain, is the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain. This is the part that teenagers have not fully developed yet. But this is the part that's responsible for logic, rational thinking, problem solving, decision making. When we teach this to kids, we often talk about the amygdala being the barking dog and the prefrontal cortex, or our fingers here, being the wise owl. When we are scared, when we are under threat, whether it's real threat or not, even perceived threat counts, the dog starts barking and the owl flies away. So that part of our brain that helps us make good decisions, we don't have access to. So grounding techniques, mindfulness practice is one way to bring the brain back online. I remember when my kids were very young, somebody said to me when they're in the midst of a tantrum or they're freaking, because kids tantrum for all kinds of reasons, and their dog is barking, ask them what they had for breakfast that morning, or like ask them a random question that they have to stop and be like, wait, what did I eat? Right? Because it brings their thinking brain back online. So the grounding techniques are things to practice so that when your thinking brain is offline, your wise owl has flown away, you're not like, wait, what did they say I should do in that webinar? Where's that resource list again, right? It's something that you do all of the time and something you can easily access and utilize and calm yourself down. Because we would be lying if we said that these conversations are not difficult to have. I know we ask people how comfortable they feel having the conversations in part of the registration. And I think it's something that like we feel equipped to have, we as mental health professionals feel equipped to have these conversations, but they're never comfortable. Nobody ever likes talking about death or being a part of a conversation that could result in death or that somebody is thinking about death. We're not comfortable with it. It's a scary place to be. And so having tools to like relax yourself is helpful. And it's something you need to practice before you need it, right? Like running a marathon. All right. So I want to make sure that we address the questions that people left in the registration. So somebody asked about crisis intervention procedures that can be used by lay people in the community. I think we've covered that, right? If we didn't, or you want more information, let us know. The important things are to be there physically, emotionally present with the person that's struggling with suicide or suicidal thoughts, knowing or trying as best as possible to remain calm, knowing what resources are available, and knowing you don't have to do this alone and you don't have to have all the answers, right? Just the act of being there with them, thinking about connection and distraction, providing them with opportunities to become aware of connections and distractions are sort of like the first approaches. And then call for help if you need it. We do all the time. We have resolve numbers on our desks. We have them sit in our speed dial on our phones. Therapists call resolve. Therapists call crisis lines, because We need help sometimes too. It's not like nobody's expecting you as a parent or a lay person in the community to have all of the answers and know what to do.
Therapists probably actually call Resolve more than the average Joe on the street. So feel comfortable knowing that. We all need that help.
Somebody else asked how to support a teen who has lost a friend to suicide or has a friend that has made suicide attempts. There is the idea of suicides being contagious. People will talk about the contagion effect and people doing like copycat suicides, and that is definitely a real thing that happens. So the one thing I'll say about that, again, in addition to all of the things we already talked about, if the young person that died by suicide is a student, either in a high school, a middle school, a university setting, most of the time the school will put services in place. They call them post-vention services, right? So they bring in professionals. If you're in Pittsburgh, it's often the STAR clinic that will do these things. STAR is part of UPMC services for teens and adolescents at risk. So they will come in, they will be available to meet individually with students. They will be available to meet with teachers, and they're often available to meet with parents or to do programming or workshops for parents. So I would encourage you to have your teen or your student utilize those services as well as yourself so that you're able to help your teen or know what to look for. And be open to talking about it. Again, you don't have to like drill it into them, but give them the space to talk about how they feel about their friend and how they feel about the loss. And don't be surprised if the feelings aren't all like, I'm sad, because sometimes people get angry or like really angry about death and about suicide in particular. So be prepared for the range of emotions that people might express. And then the final thing I would say about that is that if your teen has their own history of suicide attempts, of mental health involvement, of drug or substance abuse, any history of abuse or traumas in their background, pay extra attention. Those are sort of things that put an individual at risk or at a higher risk for depressive episodes and possibly suicide attempts themselves if they are sort of close to a person that has died by suicide. It doesn't mean that they will. There is no direct, there's no, actually, statistically speaking, they probably will not. It's a small percentage of people that attempt suicide after a friend has died by suicide. But nonetheless, I'm sure, listen, I'm a parent, statistics aren't always that helpful because you're like, great, my kid might be that 1%, I would like to know, right? So you're going to pay attention. Those are things to just be aware of in the months following. Although I just heard today actually that there does seem to be this like 6-month inoculation period where 6 months immediately following the death of a friend by suicide, the inner circle of people or the closest people to that teen don't seem to have any effects of it, but then post 6 months, things spike up. So also be aware of that. If they seem okay, that's kind of normal, but don't like totally rest it on your laurels that they're going to be fine forever, and still be aware and paying attention.
Can I jump in there real quickly too? Just to share something personal that I have experienced. I had a friend who died by suicide while I was in college, and something that was really helpful for our campus as a whole, close friends, non-close friends, everybody, was to find a way to honor that person. So we sold t-shirts for a fundraiser. We sold, those little rubber wristbands as a fundraiser. Eventually we planned like an event down the road, all really just to honor that person. And I know that made me feel better. So sometimes finding some way to, provide a memory of that person has been helpful too.
Thanks, Shelby. Are there any questions here that people have? There's a couple more that people left on the registration, but I want to make sure those that are here, we leave time and space for you to ask questions, comments.
Put them in the chat or out loud, please go ahead.
Yeah, so my question, it relates to your comment around normalizing conversations about mental health. Do you see that as kind of a form of intervention in a sense? If you're normalizing, and educating about it, it would never stop anyone, but just to kind of normalize having that level of self-awareness and how someone is feeling, and being able to check in. Would you consider that, a good way to just start introducing education around mental health and suicide?
Absolutely. I do, because I think, again, it sort of opens the door, and I think it creates a culture in the household or in the classroom or in whatever group you are involved in with teens, that those are things that we talk about here. And this is a safe place to bring those up. I know this, like, a safe space is kind of like an overplayed word sometimes, but it's true. Like, and it means something, I think, to young people, because I'm sure if you think back to your teenage years, think about like that jerk teacher or like the guy that lived next door or some person in your life that you would never talk about your feelings to, because they didn't make you feel good and they didn't make you feel safe. So you want to be the opposite of that person. If you are going to be the one person that kid tells, having set the tone, that talking about feelings, talking about emotions, even talking about your own feelings and emotions, like modeling that for them, I think is helpful. Like, talk, as much as possible, put feelings on it. Like, this happened at work today and I felt really frustrated. And so I did this instead. It's modeling self-care. It's modeling healthy coping skills, right? Like, that's not the time to talk about, and I came home and, drank a bottle of wine. That's not the kind of thing we want to talk about with teenagers, but healthy things. So I exercised. It felt really good to run fast on that treadmill and sweat and be breathing really heavily. And then I felt better, right? So talking to them about what you do and letting them, that normalizes it too. Like, they're not the only ones that are struggling with mental health, with thoughts of suicide. It's something that most of us have experienced, in either personally or within our family units at some point or another. So yeah, it's like intervention, or it's a prevention. It's something that I think can help. Again, it doesn't necessarily prevent it entirely, but it's certainly not hurting anything.
And then I had a follow-up question with respect to that. Do you find value in having youth advisors in this space, and that way the peer-to-peer dialogue? Do you feel like that breaks down, I guess, some of the hesitancy with regards to kind of having those conversations?
So when you say peer-to-peer, do you mean like other young people talking to
Yeah,
young
other
people?
young people talking. Yeah, I know that you have youth advisors through your program. And so do you educate them and equip them to be able to, have peer-to-peer conversations and things of that nature?
Yeah, that is part of what we do. And we're actually starting a peer mentoring program along those same kind of lines. It's a fine line, because at the same time, we don't want a 17-year-old mentor to feel responsible for preventing their mentee's suicide, right? But I think education, teaching teenagers how to have the conversations, things to look out for, and what to do if a friend or a mentee or someone on their team starts talking about things like this, bringing up thoughts of suicide, bringing up about cutting or self-harm. I mean, like, the more people that are educated and knowledgeable and comfortable having these conversations, I think the better. There is a program, Teen Mental Health First Aid, that sort of, I guess it's teen to teen mental health first aid, and it teaches teenagers how to support other teenagers, how to help a friend kind of when they're struggling, because we know that they are. Statistically speaking, any number of teenagers, like any kid in a high school classroom, on a sports team, in a youth group, somebody struggling with mental health. And we hear from teenagers that we work with a lot, like, I don't feel like I can talk to my friends about this. I have a great group of friends. We do things all the time. I'm not isolated. I'm not lonely. I'm not alone, but I can't talk to them about my anxiety because I don't think they'd understand, or I don't think they would get it, or I think they would judge me. So reducing the stigma, normalizing the conversation, just talking about what to do when you feel this way, or what to do when a friend brings it up to you, I think is all the better.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good questions. Anyone else? Sarah.
Yeah, I thank you for the presentation. It was really, really helpful. A lot of really good information. Question was around like the teen mental health first aid. That's something I'm super excited about, because I feel like peers often talk to their peers. Do you know if they're like, do you know of anyone that's like planning to bring it to Pittsburgh?
I don't.
Okay.
I will say my information is also not current. When they first, it's like a newer addition to the mental health first aid package of services and trainings. And it seemed like it was geared mostly towards school districts or places that had like large group of teenagers, and they could deliver the training like en masse. So I could look into it again, and I know how to get in touch with you. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like such a great opportunity. I will say there's also like Stand Together, if you're in Pittsburgh, has something similar as part of their training. That's what our peer mentors are going to go through. And Sarah, because I know you and I know where you work, stay tuned because we might have another opportunity available for people, at least in the Jewish community of Pittsburgh, for something very similar to teen mental health first aid. So, and for anybody, I mean, I feel like it'll be put out there. We'll offer it because we can have a large number of people, I think, if it goes according to how we think it will.
And you said Stand Together. Who is that, the name of the organization that puts together the curriculum?
So Stand Together is a stigma reducing school club. They're based out of Allegheny. Sarah, you might know too. They work out of Allegheny County. So they're are you in, Samika, are you local? Are you in Pittsburgh?
No, I'm not.
So they might be a national organization, or you might have something similar where you are, but they work in schools. So they're like a school club, like an extracurricular activity, and people volunteer to be a part of this club, and they put on, they create a project with the intention of reducing stigma around mental health. So it's different in every school. People will do bake sales to raise awareness, or, everybody wears a certain color on this day to raise awareness for mental health. It just sort of, again, normalizes the conversation, reduces the stigma, and lets people know that like a lot of us are struggling. So I don't know. I will look into it. I have your contact information from the registration. I can ask our contacts here if it is a national program or if it's something similar offered in other places.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, there were a couple other questions from the registration.
There was one about self-harm and cutting, but it just said self-harm and cutting. So I'm wondering, I don't know exactly what the question was. I can speak a little bit to how it relates to suicidality or suicide risk. It is a risk factor. But I also think that there is a whole segment of teenagers that cut or, do other self-injurious behaviors. And it's not a suicide attempt. It does something else. It satisfies another need for them. It's a release. It's putting physical sensation to emotional pain that they might be experiencing. So it doesn't mean that if your teen or somebody is cutting or burning themselves or scratching themselves, that they are trying to attempt suicide. But it is a risk factor. When you look at things and look at people that have successfully completed suicide or people that have died by suicide, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it is always identified as a risk factor. I guess the idea is at some point like that doesn't become enough. And so what's the next thing? Like how do they satisfy that? And how do they take that up a level if they become desensitized to it? So I don't know if the person that asked that is here and that answered the question, if there are other questions about that. It's not a suicide attempt most of the time.
Well, I want to thank everybody for attending. I am trying to put two websites in the chat box. One is for UpStreet PGH. UpStreet is our mental health program for teens and young adults at JFCS. We offer peer mentoring programs. So if you have any teens in your life that would like to be a mentor or a mentee, please let us know. Additionally, we have a text-based brief support services through our website, which is staffed not by AI, not by chatbot, but by real people, two of whom are on the call. But Erin and Shelby are two of the people who do that. And that is for anyone, parents, kids, anyone who might need some support in whatever they might be going through in that moment. And we've had people from the UK all the way to West Virginia and all the way in between. So it doesn't matter if they're here or not, we're here for help. We also have therapy services as well, and anything that you might want to ask about. So if there are trainings that you'd like to know more about any topic, please let us know that. We will be continuing our suicide prevention and awareness series in the future. We'll continue to offer these since it is something, as we've said before, we want people to feel comfortable with the uncomfortable. I also put our JFCS PGH site in there for events because, as Shelby mentioned, self-care is a big part of this. And we offer some different self-care free webinars. All these services are free. We do have art and contemplation, which is art therapy techniques. We also have guided meditation and mindfulness, both run by trauma therapists who are phenomenal. So please, look ahead, see if there's anything that might interest you. And we look forward to seeing you all again in the future. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please reach out. We are here for you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for coming, everyone.